Notice that the blue dial on the right sits 2 inches lower than the white abu on the left. Now let's look at the rods, and the rod on the right is actually a striper and the rod on the left is the ugly stick catfish. Have you played that game where you have to find the differences between two images? If you like that game, you're in for a treat today, because you really gotta open your eyes to find any difference whatsoever between these two rods. Let's look at the blanks and the guides here. The blanks look really similar, but the guides, you can probably already tell that the striper rod on the right has the guides spaced further apart, and indeed the striper rod has one guide fewer than the catfish rod. Okay, let's put the two rods on the bench for a few minutes. And again, the blue Daiwa Alexa is on the striper rod and the white Abu is on the catfish rod. And I'm gonna show you how I have positioned them, just so you know. I have positioned them to start from exactly the same point, so we can compare the lengths. I know they look a little dirty right now, but that's how yours are gonna look like too the first time shot gets anywhere close to your rods. The rods have the exact same gimbal at the butt, the same ugly stick print, the same cheap EVA foam that is actually pretty durable and fits perfectly in the Scotty rod holders, the same comfortable trigger, the same reel seat, the same locking nut, and the reels never have free play even when you're reeling under load, and the same foregrips too. Note again that while the catfish rod has a longer rear handle, the foregrip is the same length, so the overall handle is a couple inches longer than the striper rod. The rods of course have the exact same ugly tough guides, one piece stainless steel, everybody loves them, indestructible, except by rough braid. I recommend using mono with these guides or some really smooth mono like Power Pro Slick 8. But the difference is that, as I mentioned already, the catfish rod has one extra guide and the guides are spaced closer together. Guys, I'm almost done with the boring part. Bear with me one more minute. Let's take some measurements of the blanks and then we're gonna go compare how the blanks actually perform under load. Let's measure these 2 points here exactly as I touch them, because they are equal distances from the butt of the rod. 596 for the striper and 591 for the catfish. Now this was extremely interesting for me the first time I measured it, because based on what I always felt, I always thought that the catfish rod would have the thicker blank, and it turned out to be the other way around. Now I'm going to take a second measurement right here in the middle of both rods. 386 for the striper rod and 384 for the catfish rod. Again, a little bit thinner, if ever so slightly. And finally, let's measure the tips. The blue line, remember, is the striper rod, and this line is the catfish rod. 102 on the striper rod and 101 on the catfish rod. Again, the striper rod is ever so slightly thicker than the catfish rod. Okay, so let's recap the differences in construction. The catfish rod with the white reels has a slightly longer handle, so the reel sits higher. They have the same foregrip. They have almost the same blanks, the striper blank being ever so slightly thicker, and they have the same type of guides, but the catfish rod has one extra guide. Okay, the same length. And now finally let's take a look at the difference of the bend curve, which is what just fascinates me. Okay, before we put any weights, let's confirm that both rods are coming out of the rod holders under the perfect angle. And Let me show you the setup here. They're in the rod holders, the same length as well. So yeah, that will be the angle over here. And guys, if you hear some noises of kids or cicadas or whatnot, excuse the noises. I don't have a special office just to shoot my fishing videos. Okay, let's do the first comparison with 4 ounces. It's hard to see a difference. I mean, I can see the difference because I know the final results, but it's hard to see a difference with 4 ounces, right? The only thing I can tell is that neither rod looks overloaded with 4 ounces, even though both of them have a limit of 3. So when people tell you they're too flimsy, yeah, compared to all the other catfish rods at the catfish conference, they are. But if the tip is not even bent with 4 ounces, they're not that flimsy, okay? So everything is relative. I may have to start narrating here to show you the differences as I see them. But this is 8 ounces of weight. Each of these bars is 4 ounces. And we begin to see some difference, and interestingly, it's the catfish rod that has the tip bent more with 8 ounces, not the striper rod. Going to 12 ounces now, 3 pieces on each. We can clearly see that the catfish rod has more backbone but softer tip. The striper rod has softer blank, but the tip is not as soft. I wouldn't call the tip stiff by any kind of measurement. It still has a soft tip, but not as soft as the catfish rod. Moving on to 12 ounces. Same thing, even more pronounced. The catfish rod has a stiffer blank and softer tip. Okay. Now jumping from 12 to 17 ounces, which is 1 bottle of water, we have even more pronounced difference. Notice how much stiffer is the catfish blank than the striper blank. And this is the last test I'm going to do with 2 bottles, which is 1 kilogram, which is 2 point something pounds. You can see now that even the catfish rod is starting to compress from the weight. But guys, you tell me which rod has a more beautiful curve, okay? For me personally, the striper rod, more beautiful curve. Okay, I know most people that fish for catfish will prefer stiffer blank with softer tip. This seems to be the conventional wisdom, but I come from the carp fishing world, and as far as carp fishing is concerned, the striper rod has the more beautiful curve. And I personally prefer the striper rod curve over the catfish rod curve. But I know in my video I said the catfish rod is #1 just because I know that the popular opinion prefers stiffer blank and softer tip when it comes to catfishing. But for me personally, fishing from a boat, not from a bank guys, from a boat where distance is not critical, the striper rod is the best catfish rod. Guys, one last thing before I end this video, and that is casting distance. The striper rod will cast slightly further than the catfish rod. And here are the reasons. If you remember, the catfish rod had longer handle. Well, longer handle means shorter rod blank with which you're gonna be casting. So because the striper rod has the reel sit 2 inches lower, practically the blank with which you're casting is 2 inches longer than the catfish rod. Reason number 2, the catfish rod has the softer tip. Well, that soft tip is flexing during the cast, and that makes your blank again shorter compared to the striper rod on the other end now. The striper rod tip doesn't flex as much, makes the blank longer and allows it to achieve higher peripheral speed during the swing. And finally, just to exhaust all technicalities here, the catfish rod has one extra guide, which means extra friction. So for all of these reasons, when you're casting the average 3, 4, 5 ounce weight with these two rods, you will notice that the striper rod will outcast, if not by much, the catfish rod. And guys, here's a quick summary of everything I told you. I'm not gonna repeat everything again because my videos are too long, but feel free to pause if this summary can help you decide between the two rods. And that's it for this video. But more comparisons like this are coming, so if this is the first time you see this channel, please consider subscribing. And if you have any kind of questions, I love reading and replying to all of my questions, so just leave them down below. And I will see you at the next review.